hear from that guy that most of you know, Treacy Duerfeldt, has been a member of our club now for a little over 5 years, I believe. And he's also the district fundraiser chair for the Rotary Foundation, yeah. Too many words going through my mind every time. You may even be aware of his polio fitness challenges and interests, including his Scotch collection. He'll explain that. He's here today to discuss his nonprofit, which does or what it does, and why it might be of interest to you. So that doesn't tell you much about what he's going to talk about, but let's hear what he's going to talk about. Let's welcome Treacy.
Okay, now it's one of those rare events where I actually have a presentation. So I gotta remember Windows. There we are. Oop. Getting there. Now I gotta go into slide show. You can tell I do have a sense of humor still.
You got it? You want me to do it?
Go ahead. Vanna, if you could.
Okay. Vanna needs her glasses.
So anyway, the first time I ever tasted whiskey, my dad was trying to discourage me from alcohol. It was a Canadian rye whiskey known as Seagram 7 is what it was. I think he felt that if I tasted this when I was 10 or 11 years old, I'd never have any again. I think he's wrong. Although that's not my favorite whiskey. Whiskey in my family actually has meant something. And you know how we have a Rotary story? I have a whiskey story. Okay. One of my whiskey stories goes back to 1993. My dad called me, and he was being honored. He's a bigwig Rotarian. And he was being honored for his work with the Soar Optimists in Japan, a big national honor. He said, I can't go, I can't fly anymore. Can you go and take care of this for me? So I went and took care of it and visited our sister city. Now, my dad and I have been involved in sister cities for any number of years since the early 80s. And my dad, having been a whiskey drinker, had put his name on a bottle at a neighborhood bar. Okay? At one point in time, I could recognize 1,000 Japanese or Chinese characters. I saw that bottle. I didn't know it was there. I was just wandering around with a friend, as we do, and I was like, that. And they said, yeah, Duerfeldt-san. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so, my whiskey story. And so I was reintroduced to whiskey back in '93, saying, wow, that is really something. And I started at that time, just casually, like most people, learning a little bit about whiskey in general. Okay? Let's fast forward a little bit. And about 5-6 years ago, I took an interest in Scotch, which is a form of whiskey, the most prevalent or dominant form of whiskey out of Scotland. I'll tell you more. And I initially started collecting a few bottles. 2008 hit. I sold the bottles to pay for a few bills, and well, things are good again, so I've been collecting again for the last 3 years. I'm up to about 50 bottles in 1,200 years. So I'm going to show you a couple special things. But it was a little over a year ago, a little under a year ago, 2 years ago, excuse me, that this came forward. And so, if you might remember from a couple of years ago, okay, there was an auction, Valentine's auction, and this was what was for bid. Perry and a group together, combined, bid on this item, and then later that year, in 2014, came over to my house to make good on the item. And as you can tell, it was 159 years of Scotch and 5 bottles. That's a big deal. And these are all 5, just like most of my bottles, rare, discontinued, from discontinued stills. They don't exist anymore. You just can't get them. And we had a really neat moment where we said, we should do this more often. And so we had our first meeting at the Water Street Cafe, and Jeff was very accommodating. And I don't know, a couple dozen people showed up, and John Doan, I think you were one of them. And I didn't know John as the city manager of Tumwater or anything of the sort. He was just another whiskey guy. Okay? And so we've been kind of wandering the landscape. We've had now 21 meetings, and we're up to about 170 members. Okay? We have little slogans. Learn it, like it, love it. Okay? Which is generally an approach we take to it. You can't like it if you don't understand it. You certainly can't love it if you don't like it. We kind of work our way backwards and engineer things. And we said, you know, this is getting serious. We could be doing some things here. So let's talk about a vision. And we said, you know, what are we? Well, as you'll know, if you get further into our materials, we're about education and cultural understanding through whiskey. What does that mean? Okay, what can it mean? We don't just come together, a couple dozen of us every month to get together and drink. That is not who we are. Okay, not at all. There's a huge difference between drinking and tasting. Okay? When you taste, you're trying to understand, you're trying to learn. When you drink, you're trying to avoid learning. I learned that in college. So I'm going to give you a little idea here. This is our tasting card. If you ever come to a meeting with us, you know, we're trying to introduce you to all kinds of brown liquids, typically. And you say, well, what does it taste like? Well, if you've never tasted whiskey or really enjoyed whiskey before, which is more than half our membership, okay, they come for the first time saying, you know, I never really understood whiskey, or I never understood why my spouse enjoys whiskey. I'm here to understand. Perfect new member. We say, you know, what kinds of things do you look for when you taste a dessert? What kinds of things do you look for when you taste beer or wine? And we start generating reference points, okay? Things in their experience, in their life experience, that they can start looking for and understanding. Because if they can hang something from their life experience on that hat rack of whiskey, okay, now we can start getting them to understand where in the process, where in the region, you know, really where that came from. Not just from their understanding, but how that may have been delivered. Okay? So people have, by the way, we have 3 tastings officially on the card. We usually fill up the back with 3 or 4 more. Okay? So somebody comes to a meeting of ours and they pay their $20. They're like, well, I'm only going to do 3 tastings. Like, no, usually around 5 to 7. Okay? But we advertise 3 for safety reasons. What can things taste like? I mean, there's so much to learn about your palate. Okay? One of the things I've learned as I've been studying this formally is I took a 4-hour sommelier level course down in Las Vegas from Stephen Wynn's sommelier. He has a nice little school. His room is full of the most diverse set of bottles I've ever seen, roughly 1,400 bottles of different whiskeys. And what I learned is that it's not about tasting as much as it might be about smelling. And you say, hold it, whiskey and wine? No, not at all like that. If you put your nose over a glass of whiskey, all you're doing to do is burn out your nose. He showed me something, how to taste whiskey differently. It has very little to do with how it goes over your tongue and into your throat. Okay? The best temperature with which to taste any spirit is body temperature. So how do you do that? Well, you hold it in your mouth for longer than a second. Again, it's tasting, not drinking. So when we educate, now, if you ever come to a meeting, we always teach this every quarter, you know, how to taste, especially when we get to some of our higher end bottles. We don't want you to just throw it back. And what does that mean? How many more flavors can you pick up? Your palate, your tongue, can only pick up 7 different flavors. Your nose, if we can figure out how to incorporate that into what you're tasting, you can pick out over 179 different flavors. You'll call them different things depending on your life experience. Anise is licorice. Honey and caramel are very close. What's the difference? We talk about that. We try to figure out why that's important. Okay? Now, one of the neat things about our club is we have put together what we'd like to call a proprietary method of expressing our group tasting. If you have 20 of these tasting cards, you put them into a spreadsheet and hand them to Diana here, all of a sudden you have a word cloud. So for everything we taste, you kind of get an idea of what the group kind of thought, and you see how each flavor has maybe a different size. So that would indicate maybe the number of people that shared that same comment. Okay? So it's kind of interesting how you can learn about something and why when it comes to your sense of taste and smell. And then we tie this back to the distillation process. When something seems a little spicy or it stings, it's one of two things. Either it's a lot of alcohol you're not used to, slow down, add some water, okay? Or it could have been in a fresh French oak barrel, and you're tasting a lot of the initial spice that develops from that kind of barreling. And each flavor has that kind of origin story, okay? I can talk about how certain things come from a caramel flavor or a floral flavor and why. I was just talking about a scotch a Sunday ago that incorporates heather, the purple flower, okay? They mix it up with the peat, and they use the peat very lightly before they smoke the germinated barley to provide for that flavor in the whiskey. So I mean, there's different kinds of things in the process that you can pinpoint if you can take the flavor and look for it. It's kind of a fun hobby. Somebody says, what's the difference between a whiskey connoisseur and a whiskey drinker? I said, what's the difference between a bird watcher and an ornithologist? Same thing. We know what we're calling things. We know what to reference. Okay? Everybody watches birds once in a while, but how many of you are ornithologists? This is more fun, in my opinion. We can teach a lot of things with whiskey other than whiskey. Okay? This is one of my prized bottles. Okay? This was distilled in 1921 as a medicinal whiskey, because in 1920, liquor was outlawed in this country. Okay? And after it came out of the barrel, it was, oh, it's okay. 1933. You will see this bottle as a part of an experience that will be marketed by the film festival people during Repeal Day this next year. Why Repeal Day? Well, Repeal Day is when they, again, allowed alcohol into our country. This is a repeal bottle. How many of you would like to understand what whiskey tasted like in 1921 or 1933? Jim raises his hand very quick. Okay? So, again, what was the dominant alcoholic drink during Prohibition? It was whiskey. Okay? More history. You know, our country's been upset about taxes for a long time. Okay? The first time there was an actual rebellion where we sent out, I think there were like 80 farmers in East Pennsylvania, and we sent out 2,000 troops. Okay? George Washington put down his first rebellion. It was all over Alexander Hamilton imposing a tax on whiskey. Okay? Now that's our American tradition. It goes back further than that. Many, many Scottish and Irish lives were lost because the British were overtaxing the whiskey from each of their countries before they even got here. So this tradition of whiskey and taxation has long and deep roots. Now, what's our whiskey tax in Washington? Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Now, George Washington, another little bit of history, through understanding and figuring out a compromise with the farmers in eastern Pennsylvania, saw a business model he liked. He got into the whiskey business. Shortly after John Adams took over as president, he opened his own still in Mount Vernon. And guess what? It closed as his family moved on, but Mount Vernon and his home now has activated that whiskey still, and you can buy whiskey that is made from George Washington's whiskey still today. A lot of history. I mentioned eastern Pennsylvania farmers. See, when farmers have more than they can sell, and they've got leftover crops, that's how whiskey started. Why not make it something everybody can enjoy? And back in the day, 300-400 years ago, it was not just something to party with. Okay, back in the day, the whole world was suffering from bad water. Okay, so many ways of keeping your palate wet involved alcohol. In addition to that, it was considered medicinal, and there's arguments pro and con for that. But people felt better after they drank it, so that's how it kind of got started. It goes back even further than that. I mean, the true origin comes from the Middle East. Some guys went over there, did some work in the second set of holy wars, came back with the knowledge of distillation. And that knowledge resided with a Catholic monk, and in the 13th century started sharing some of that knowledge. And 200 years later, the first whiskey distilleries were actively producing whiskey for the communities and publics, pre-licensed and post-licensed. What I got some pictures of her. I did go to Scotland this last September. These are the Lefroy stills over here. And in Scotland, you use 2 stills. It's a double distillation method. You take the 8% alcohol fluid and you boil it down once and you boil it down a second time and then you get whiskey. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that. The other picture over there to the left is what's called a washback. That's where that 8% fluid is made. Another whiskey trivia point. If you ever taste in a whiskey some sort of texture, okay, it's an unfiltered type of whiskey. It's from the resin from those washbacks, which are all made out of Norwegian pine, and they all run about, those are 600,000 a piece, and those stills up there are about 400,000 a piece. Pure copper, and they take about 100,000 a year to maintenance. So it's not a business model for the faint of heart. Okay. Let's talk about the international ramifications of whiskey. Whiskey's all over the world. Okay. Anywhere the British Empire was, there's whiskey. Okay. But it seems to be really picking up in Asia. All right. We had a great debate a little over a year ago about Japanese whiskey as compared to Scotch. It's a 54-minute video on our website. I moderated it, but 2 people, subject matter experts, debated the pros and cons of each. Again, education. And the simple conclusion of that debate is that Scotch is more of an art and Japanese whiskey is more of a craft. And that is culturally reflected. But you discover that by trying to learn. Maybe some countries drink too much or are less discriminating. France, Uruguay. But regardless, whiskey is a worldwide phenomenon. Can you see that the whiskey consumption per capita, the U.S. is only 3rd? Okay. And you look at the United Kingdom, and they're not up at the top 5 even. Okay. When I travel and I start asking people about what they think of whiskey, I almost always get an answer. Okay. So cultural understanding. This is a bridge item. It's just like wine. Okay. And the thing that I kind of think about is if Uruguay, let's say I went down to Uruguay, how would they describe the same thing I tasted? What kind of flowers or flavors would they use to describe, a Ben Nevis? I don't know. But worldwide whiskey production is still about Scotland. Okay. Now, when I talk about worldwide whiskey production, things are changing fast. Okay? The whole world is beginning to really produce a lot of whiskey. Japan is really bringing a lot of whiskey online, both in its country and as the proud owners via Suntory of Jim Beam and their associated brands. They are going to be the dominant player in the U.S. if we're not careful. Okay? Again, they have a very different approach to whiskey. And it's interesting. It's very interesting. But we're also seeing some new stuff. My prized bottle, other than the old American one I showed you, is a Port Ellen 30-year. And that was a still that was discontinued in 1982. It's considered the top-rated whiskey, and that is particularly one of the top-rated bottlings in the world. And their stills are now in India, producing Indian whiskey. Okay, see how this kind of cross-pollinates? Taiwan is launching into the whiskey business hard. Okay. But what's more interesting is it's right here at home. One distillery is opening in the state of Washington every 3 months. That is a huge economy. I invited John Doan, and just hold up for a second, John. You come on up, or you can. I prefer it if you could just come on up while you're talking. The handouts on your table are about a brewery and distillery center that we're attempting to host in Tumwater. Part of that is my vision of a whiskey education center. Okay, our organization is all about education and cultural understanding. I saw a whiskey education center at the Blume Distillery. It's amazing what you can learn if you focus. It would be the only kind of brewery and distilling center of its kind in the Pacific Northwest. Come on up, John. We've got about 2 minutes. But John Doan is the city manager at Tumwater. Again, he came to our first meeting. He recently came to our last meeting. He'll take a few minutes, and then I'll come right back for just a few questions, because I'm getting the hook here from Greg already.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be here as a fellow Rotarian. I talked about this topic with Brad Shannon from the Olympian yesterday. We talked for 45 minutes. So I need to squeeze that 45 minutes into 2 minutes. And in short, as Treacy said, this is the #1 craft distilling state in the Union. There are about 100 distilleries here of the 700 craft distilleries in the United States. We are #5 in terms of craft breweries per capita. Oregon is #1 in terms of craft breweries per capita. There are only 2 cider making schools in the United States. One is in Washington State, up in Mount Vernon, and it's looking for a new home. The other one is at Cornell University in New York. So there's an opportunity out there to bring together around a center of excellence, brewing, distilling, and cider education. That's what our project is. That's what you have on the table. There's a 4-page piece, which is sort of an overview of the project, describes the number of our partners, describes what we're trying to do. For Tumwater, it's really about trying to create an incentive for the redevelopment of the brewery. What we have learned in doing that is it is also for the state of Washington an opportunity to grow an industry. Think about what Walla Walla did for the wine industry in Washington. This is now the #2 wine state in the nation. We want to do the same thing for craft brewing and distilling and cider making. The 1-page sheet that you have has to do with a piece of property that we are working with a private developer to hopefully land the educational piece of the craft brewing and distilling center. It is one of the pieces that was Trevo's Bellatory project, pretty close to where the new La Quinta is located. We are lobbying the legislature for that. So any support anyone wants to provide to our legislators, that would be very much appreciated. Love to answer more questions at some point, or drop me an email or whatever if you want to chat more about it. A tremendous opportunity, tremendous project, and love to see it happen. And if you're interested in this topic, really, Treacy's meetings are pretty awesome. Does them in a great style so that you can learn. And I'm sort of an American whiskey guy, so Scotch sort of intimidated me, and I'm sort of getting the hang of it, so I appreciate that.
You bet, John. Okay, and I do have some cards if you want to know about our meetings. We have you sign up at meetup.com. Okay, there's all kinds of liquor control board things that Mary's assistant deputy, Mary Segala's assistant deputy, walked us through. So I can't publicly announce a meeting, but when you join meetup.com, there's no cost. You sign up for just getting on our list, and then you'll get regular notices of everything we do and access to all our content and material. Are there any brief questions? I've got 1 minute, Greg. Yes, sir.
Matt Clue, and I would like to know your address and directions to your house.
It is a liquor and a
And the combination to my bulk, I'm sure. Any other serious questions?
Of course you do.
Please.
Do Iranians drink whiskey?
In secret, just like Amish. Next. I've drank whiskey with an Iranian while I was in Japan, so I can say that's true. Go ahead, please.
Do they still make white heather brand?
I have a way of looking that up.
I'd be very interested.
Jim, please.
Just a comment, I was at the Washington Center last night at a show, and I was talking to the lady next to me, and said, tomorrow well, she's a big Scotch drinker, so I said, tomorrow we're doing a thing on Scotch at our Rotary Club, and the lady behind her says, what Rotary Club are you in? And I said, Lacey. She says, I'm an Olympian, yours sounds a lot more fun than ours.
I want to add on to that. You're going to give me a few more minutes. Okay. 1 second, Andy. We do raise money for Rotary. I mean, not only do we have the thing that we give away here, but we also have raised no less than $1,000, both for the Evergreen University at one of their auctions and South Puget Sound for theirs. Just our little tasting goes for a lot of money. It's becoming the favorite item. Go ahead, Andy, please.
What do you think of all these new craft distilleries that are opening up in Washington? And do you think they can really compete with some of these older Scotch and other whiskeys that are out there?
Tatoosh and Westland are great examples of Washington distilleries that have impressed me. Westland, for example, has a single malt whiskey that's entirely Washington. Even the peat they use to smoke it is from the Olympic Peninsula. We never knew we had peat bogs in the state of Washington. We knew something about barley, okay? Tatoosh has the only rye whiskey I actually like. So, I mean, it's hit and miss. I think it really is a matter of can they hang in there for at least 6 years to have an aged product that's going to hold up to what's conventionally done. We are going to have, February 6th is our next meeting. I obviously can't tell you where unless you sign up, but one of the topics we're going to talk about is the difference in American distillation methods between the macro and the micro. So,
Okay.
all right.
Thanks, Tracy. Interesting topic. I've been to a semi one of his tastings, and they're a lot of fun. So after that, I think I'm going to go a little more regularly, I hope. You know the tradition, you know the program. I find a book that kind of matches your topic, and I really had a hard time. The closest I got was Sunshine, Shoeshine, and Moonshine. We're going to give the book to the South Sound Reading Foundation for a youngster, and the name of this is Blueberries for Sal, not Moonshine for Sal. So if you wouldn't mind signing that, thank you again. Give a round of applause, please.